This is Guy Burgess. I wanted to follow up on my last discussion of the scale-up problem and explain what I meant by the Google traffic or the traffic system metaphor as a way of thinking about a complexity-oriented approach to scaling up the field's efforts to really operate at the enormous scale that conflicts involving millions of people require. So we start with the metaphor of the traffic system. And any big city, or small city for that matter, has this gigantic system that's been created that allows people to move around. And what I want to do is look at some of the new ways, the new sort of high-tech ways that we developed for making the system work better, and to then ask whether or not they might realistically be applied to conflict problems. And I think we can adapt a lot of these ideas to the conflict problem, certainly. So I'll start with the traffic system as a metaphor. And it's a complex system in that the way that it operates is determined by the decisions of multitudes of independent actors driving their own cars and trucks, as well as bicycles and taking mass transit, as well as the way the system is designed and built by professionals like the Institute for Highway Engineers here. Now, one of the more interesting things that's emerged in the world of traffic and how we can improve the way in which it flows around big cities is Google Traffic. And what Google does is they produce these maps, and not only that, they produce bulletins that they send out to your phone indicating that you should take a different route because there's a problem with the original route that you've chosen. They give you assessments about how much of a delay and all of that. And so you've got a map here which sort of summarizes what they're able to accomplish, where you've got little red circles, which are accidents that are reported into the system. You have red lines, which are places where the traffic isn't flowing very well. And then you have a bunch of yellow exclamation marks, which are all additional comments that's come in through their crowdsourced system. So basically, they have built this map out of a combination of data from all the millions of cell phones that are traveling around a city at any one time. And those cell phones radio into Google where you're going and how fast, and that's used for making these traffic maps, which are astonishingly accurate. And then you have, of course, the official highway operation system where they know where the construction is, and they've got all of their sensors, and they've got reports of accidents. And then you have this Waze system, which is a crowdsourced system where people can submit information about all sorts of problems. And what this enables people to do, and it basically illuminates problems on the system, whether they're construction or accidents. It's time for folks to take detours so they can avoid it. So in a sense, this is improving the operation of the system, but from the perspective of narrow self-interest, is you're showing people how they can get to where they want to go as quickly and efficiently as possible. And you're also sort of improving the aggregate system because you're channeling people away from bottlenecks caused by accidents or that sort of thing. But there are other ways in which the society as a whole contributes to the more or less effective functioning of the highway system. Certainly, drivers that develop better driving skills are a big addition. Driving around in the Colorado mountains in the winter versus Washington in a snowstorm, and you'll discover what a difference the ability to drive in snow really makes. So some of it's just driving skills, and some of it's technology. We've got a new Subaru that has astonishing technology in terms of warning you of obstacles or that there's somebody in your blind spot, rear view cameras. So some of it can be technology, some of it can be driving skills. Again, it's appealing to narrow self-interest, but it also serves aggregate interest because the more people that have this, the safer and more efficient the system is for everyone else. But the other thing that makes the highway system works is when you start to shift over just sort of narrow self-interest into altruistic interest. And here one good metaphor is the Adopt a Highway program, where pretty much all over the country, a lot of the sort of basic cleanup and litter stuff is now handled by volunteers in exchange for a minuscule amount of publicity for their good work. But it's everybody saying that, not only do I have to behave reasonably when I drive and try to avoid traffic problems, but I'm going to give back to the system in some way. And there are lots of other ways in which people make active contributions to the functioning of the highway system. One is just, a lot of public service don't let friends drive drunk. And the taboos against drunk driving are now serious enough that it's a real deterrent. You have good Samaritans that come to the aid of people who are victims of accidents. You have programs like this one to report every drunk driver or dangerous driver immediately. Again, it's sort of harnessing everybody to improve the operation of the system. And then you, of course, have professional contributors, folks who actually get paid to design and build better highways, to maintain emergency response, figure out how traffic flows. And over time, this doesn't produce either a perfect or an awful system, but you have sort of a whole series of charts like this that track increasing or decreasing aggregate safety and travel times and that sort of thing. So in a sense, the way that you measure progress in the highway system is, are things getting better or worse? And in a real sense, you need to do that with conflict. Well, how can we do things to make the overall system slowly get better and worse? And of course, there are things that go wrong. I mean, there are lots of reasons in which to say that our society isn't doing a very good job of maintaining the highway system. The highway engineer folks have given the road system in the United States a grade of D because it's not being maintained. The taxes that we pay through fuel taxes to maintain the highway system aren't adequate, and it's slowly deteriorating. So it isn't just that, all this makes everything great. We also collectively fail to do what we should do. And you can think about ways to improve that. So the question is, we start with a working within limits highway system, and can we adopt some of those models to making a conflict system that works a little better, again, within limits? And that's one of the big things that we want to talk about with the MOOS project as it continues. And so one question, this is something that actually goes back quite a ways. Paul Ware may have been the first to come up with the idea of conflict mapping. There's certainly conflict assessments and all of this that go back quite a ways, but one of the things that we've been exploring, and we're still at the early stages of figuring out how to do that, is to use advanced computer graphic techniques to map conflicts in ways that make what's happening, things that are going wrong, things that could be improved, a lot more visible. And it's certainly possible to start to create something that's a bit like a Google map, could even be crowdsourced, much like the Google map, that would give people a much clearer idea of what's happening in the conflict system and how we might be able to improve it. So then you can ask if, are there analogs to the little red dots on Google traffic maps that say there's a problem? And we could certainly build a system that highlights conflict traps. And the thing about traps is once you see them, everybody has an interest in avoiding them. So we could, for instance, build a system that highlights the actions of divide and conquer actors who are cynically trying to manipulate and exacerbate conflict for selfish political purposes. We could highlight misunderstandings, escalation and polarization dynamics, backlash where people are rebelling against getting forced to do things they don't want to do, disrespect and dehumanization, propaganda, the posterity trap where we solve current problems by pushing the costs off on future generations, and things like double crossing. You get a really long list of these things, but there are a lot of people who have an interest and say, hey, I'm about to fall into this, and if I do, it's really going to hurt. And they're going to be interested in ways to avoid that. So we could try to build such a system. We could also try to sort of instill a sense in which everybody has a role to play to kind of improve it. So instead of adopting a highway, we want people to adopt a conflict problem. And this implies a certain amount of specialization. You don't say, I'm going to clean up the whole highway system. I'm going to work on this part. Somebody else work on other parts. So if we could get everybody to work on a little part of it, but different little parts. So there's a fair amount of coverage of the overall thing. That'd be a heck of a step forward. There's also a sense in which we can try to get people to just teach and develop do-it-yourself conflict skills. And there's a whole big program in conflict resolution and education. These folks are trying to bring together and then disseminate these kinds of materials. But at the K-12 level, at the college level, there are an enormous number of programs out there that try to help people develop more constructive conflict handling skills. Those could all be improved and extended. There's also a sort of analog to the highway good Samaritan, where you have, at least one way of conceptualizing this is Bill Urey's Third Siders. And he's identified 10 roles that good Samaritans trying to help a community torn by conflict can play to help contain, resolve, and prevent really destructive conflicts. And there are a lot of different variations of that. There are, of course, also roles for professional contributors, folks that actually are paid to pursue conflict roles. You can get some of these associated with the Alliance for Peace Building or the Association for Conflict Resolution and lots of other organizations. So the question is, how can we best build on this Google traffic metaphor, assuming it makes sense to try to build on it? What other social learning processes are there, and maybe in sectors other than highways, that basically are ways in which the society as a whole is learning how to handle issues more effectively and constructively that we could borrow and apply to the conflict problem? And I think all of this is a key to thinking at the very, very large scale that the intractable conflict problem demands.